Warm good morning to one and all present here. I, Meghna Manoj, on behalf of History Society of Satyavati College, Shashwat, Delhi University, would like to welcome you all to this webinar on Environmental History of Natural Events by Professor Vipul Singh. Before we get further, I would like to introduce our principal, Dr. Nirmal Jindal, who is with us here today. Dr. Nirmal is a devoted and proficient leader who's associated herself with several professional bodies. At the same time, she is also a very good political scientist and mainly works on international relations. Welcome, ma'am. I request you to share a few words with the audience.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Because I think there's some disturbance in the voice. Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
okay.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. Professor Vipul Singh, Dr. Bhuvan Jha, our TIC, my esteemed colleagues and dear friends. I welcome you all to this webinar on environmental history of natural events, organized by Shashwat, History Society of Satyavati College. I'm very much honored to be here to welcome you all, and History Department has been organizing very interesting webinars on unique topics. And this topic is also quite unique to me, because being a student of political science, I've been, I'm familiar with the history of society, states, international relations, human history, history of science and technology. We have been, familiar with all these kind of histories. And usually we consider most of the natural calamities, natural events, if there is flood, tsunami, or earthquake, or there is forest fires. Concept is very common these days, like in the US and Australia, we often hear about these kind of things. So we consider these as calamities or natural events. But there is no systematic study of these kind of events, that how these events have been occurring and they have been implicating the environment and the human history. And I was really surprised when I went to Grand Canyons and I saw that how there was a small hut of marbles, and it is just a unique thing that they've displayed, that how these things, when there's any earthquake or any natural thing, all these things go underground, forests, or, humans and all these things, and how they convert into different kind of things. So they have been, projecting these kind of things. National parks in the US, they are preserving different kind of things. But in India, this is a pretty new concept. I was a child when I used to hear about, my mom used to tell me about earthquake, because in India, whenever there used to be earthquake, we used to run outside the houses. We were warned. We had no training, but we used to be told, go out, or, stand around the wall. So my mom used to tell me about one big earthquake in Kota, but I've not studied much about that. I've heard about a lot of, floods immediately after independence, because my grandparents came from Firozpur. So they used to tell me that immediately after independence, there was a flood, because there was no scientific system of a warning system about these kind of things. So they said that they were standing on the road and the water came like a wall, and everybody went up. So we don't have any systematic study of these kind of events. So I'm very much interested to hear Professor Vipul Singh that how we should, maybe there are some researches I'm not aware of, this kind of history of natural events, or, the history of these kind of things, and how they have implicated environment as well as human history. So I think this is a new area of research, and there's much to explore, new dimensions of natural calamities. So I'm very much happy that Professor Bhuvan Jha, every time he brings in some new topics, and please keep the recordings and put it on the US to the Indian website, so that the university and college website, so that other students also get benefited, because some of the students are not participating at this point of time. But if these kind of talks are available on the college website, YouTube channel, I think all the students can get benefited. I will also, because it is a pleasure listening to these kind of distinguished professors time and again. You hear them once, again you want to revisit, you want to hear them again and again. So recording has this. So this is, I think, blessing in disguise in COVID that we have started these webinars and we are keeping the recording of all these talks. So I congratulate Dr. Bhuvan Jha for taking these kind of initiatives. And thank you, Professor Vipul Singh ji, for being on Satyavati College platform. Though we are in a physical mode, but still, you know, for webinars, I think this is very convenient and quite cost effective, time-wise as well as otherwise. So we will continue to have this kind of webinars in future as well. So I welcome all the participants on the Satyavati College platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words of wisdom and encouragement. Now, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, Professor Vipul Singh. Speaking of Professor Vipul Singh, he teaches environmental history at the Department of History, University of Delhi. He is an alumnus Carson Fellow of Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society, Ludwig Maximilian University, Germany. His major area of focus has been ecologically harsh zones of India, such as arid western Rajasthan and floodplains of Ganga. His other research interests include migration, inland fisheries, and popular culture as depicted in folklore and vernacular literature. He is currently working on a long-term environmental history of Indian Ocean arena and digital globalization. It is indeed an honor to have you among us, sir. So without further ado, I will now call upon our own Professor Bhuvan Jha to formally welcome our guest of honor. Sir, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Meghna, and thank you, our principal, Professor Nirmal Jindal, for gracing the occasion. It is indeed a great pleasure for all of us to have Professor Vipul Singh amongst us. And when we talked and we zeroed in on this topic, Professor Singh has been researching on many aspects of environmental history for so many years now. And if you look at how different branches of history have emerged over the years, this is a relatively new discipline in the history, new branch of study, and it is catching a lot of attention these days, also because of contemporary hazards to environment and nature. So it's indeed because when a historian analyzes these events, then he comes up with some new perspectives, some new kind of analysis. And we will see how different phenomena, different pandemics or disasters have been analyzed from the perspective of an environmental historian. तो यह हम सब लोगों के लिए बहुत खुशी की बात है, शाश्वत के लिए, इतिहास की समिति के लिए, समाज के लिए यहाँ पर इस कॉलेज में, कि प्रोफेसर विपुल सिंह आज हम लोगों को इस विषय के बारे में, बारीकियों के बारे में बताएंगे। इन घटनाओं को जो प्राकृतिक आपदाएं हुई हैं हमारे इतिहास में, उसको पर्यावरणीय इतिहास के दृष्टिकोण से हम किस प्रकार से देख सकते हैं, एक अलग दृष्टिकोण से उसको विकसित कर सकते हैं, हमारी जो समझ है उसको विकसित कर सकते हैं। और अब तो हर कॉलेज में हर विद्यार्थी को कुछ न कुछ इन्वायरमेंटल इश्यूज के बारे में पढ़ना आवश्यक होता है। तो उस तरह के जो विद्यार्थी हैं, जैसे हिस्ट्री, पॉलिटिकल साइंस के विद्यार्थी भी उस इश्यूज को पढ़ते हैं, तो उस दृष्टिकोण से भी इस तरह के सेमिनार के इस विषय को समझने की आवश्यकता है। सिर्फ विज्ञान के दृष्टिकोण से ना देखें, सिर्फ एक कवि या साहित्यकार के माध्यम से ना देखें, इतिहास के दृष्टिकोण से भी देखें कि इतिहासकार इन घटनाओं को, इन आपदाओं को, इन प्राकृतिक क्षतियों को किस रूप में देखता है। तो और प्रोफेसर विपुल सिंह हमारे बहुत पुराने परिचित हैं। हॉस्टल में हम लोग कई वर्ष सीनियर जूनियर हमारे सीनियर हुआ करते थे हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट में भी। तो हमने इनके साथ कई बार इनको पहले से भी बोल रहे थे कि सर आपको आना है सत्यवती कॉलेज में। बीच में पैंडेमिक हो गया, और चूंकि हम नेचुरल इवेंट्स की बात कर रहे हैं तो ऑब्वियसली कोविड पैंडेमिक विल आल्सो फिगर इन दैट डिस्कशन। So he agreed, and this final journey was decided at a very short notice. And in spite of his very busy schedule, he has agreed to come to our Satyavati College and inform our audience about how a historian would analyze the natural events. We welcome you, sir, to the college, and we are extremely happy. We are extremely privileged to have you here today. Thank you so much. And this video, as Professor Jindal was saying, we will be uploading it on the college's YouTube channel and also on the YouTube channel of Shashwat, the History Society, so that for posterity, for future generations also, this lecture could be useful. Thank you, sir. Meghna, you can take over.
I now invite Dr. Vipul Singh to start his presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Meghna. And obviously, thanks for your kind words of praise. And thank you so much, Dr. Bhuvan Jha, who's been my friend for many years now. And of course, the principal of the college, Professor Nirmal Jindal. Dr. Bhuvan Jha has been sharing all your, the kind of work you've been doing to the college, and then this is really praiseworthy. The entire faculty of the history department, I know I'm not very familiar with the department, but there must be around in this webinar. I really thank them also for inviting me to this college to share my work with them. And obviously, this topic which was, selected. One thing that was considered was that it should be understandable to the students. Now, obviously, it's a very complicated topic when it comes to research, but I've tried to bring the level down to the understanding of an undergraduate students, and I hope I justify the title which were selected both by me and Dr. Bhuvan Jha. So, and really, I really love the History Society name, Shashwat, which is actually very good, very beautiful name. So, so let's begin with the title itself. So we call it the environmental history of the natural events. Now, as the principal was telling us that the natural events mean a lot of things, like you have floods, you have earthquakes, you have many other, calamities. Now, obviously, when you look at these calamities, for a normal person or for a non-historian, these calamities are nothing but something which, the reason was behind this was all natural, and the humans have actually to face the wrath of the nature in some sense. Now, a historian looks at these events and different various events which have occurred in the past. He looks these events very differently, not only in terms of the causes, because there are many natural catastrophes for which the causes are not yet known. So for a historian, it is very difficult to trace the causes of those. But then a historian then studies the implication of those catastrophes and implication on the society, implication on the economy, the culture, and all that stuff. So we'll talk about all those. But let me first begin with an anecdote from 19th century. And this anecdote is actually from Valencia Lake, which is in Venezuela. And, Valencia Lake is very famous. I mean, it is famous for, its serene beauty. But, in 19th century, early 19th century, there was a German scholar whose name was, he was in fact a geography scholar. His name was Humboldt. And in fact, Humboldt is, it's a very famous scholarship also given in Germany to the historians. It's called the Humboldt Scholarship. So Humboldt, in the early 19th century, he did a kind of a field study of this Lake Valencia in Venezuela. And he found that the level of water in the lake had been going down over the years, right? So his observation was that the cause for the declining level was the deforestation which has been brought about by the humans. So there has been deforestation all around the hills in those areas, and that's how the water level came down. Now, just because he was a geography scholar, he had all the understanding, but then he does not go, he does not have the training of looking at the historical documents. But then he realized that, the risk, the kind of recent human activities around the lake were not conducive to creating or bringing water to the lakes. So they were basically mainly responsible for the change. So in order to understand the problem, he looks back at history, but he doesn't have the documents to suggest that. So he went to those areas, he did a field study, looked at this area, and then argued that it happened because of the beginning of some kind of an indigo plantation that had taken place after the Spaniards had taken control of Venezuela. So when Venezuela became a Spanish colony, a lot of forest was then cleared, and then the plantation started in those cleared forests. Now, water from the rivulets which were coming and going to the lakes, they were diverted to different plantations, because the plantations needed a lot of water for the plants to grow. So for irrigation purpose, all these rivulets which were coming from the hills, they were diverted to the plantation. Now, this was the reason which led to the decline of the water level in the Valencia lake. Now, this was an observation which was done somewhere around 1825. And then, what happens? In 1845, there was another French economist who went to that area. His name was Boussingault. And in 1845, he observed a different thing altogether. When he went there, after say some 25 years after Humboldt had visited that place, he found that the lake water had actually gone up. So instead of going down, it has gone up. So now Boussingault, he attributed this, this reversal of the situation in the lake Valencia, to some kind of a political change. And he observed, that the Spanish Empire, which Humboldt had suggested that, how the Spanish Empire had controlled and then led to the plantation in those areas. He observed that the Spanish Empire by that time had declared Venezuela as an independent area. And now, as a result of Venezuela being declared as independent state, the slaves became free. And then once the slave become free, the indigo plantation actually declined. So this in turn led to the reduction of the use of irrigation water, and then the rivulets, which were diverted to those plantations, they became live again. So obviously, when the rivulets were coming to the water level in the lake went up. So this is how this has been explained by these two 19th century scholars. But if you look at these scholars were not historians, but still they tried to understand the changes in nature by going back to the few decades of human history. So the only difference that you find with that of a historian's understanding of these things was that the analysis was purely based on observation, and they did not consult any documentary proof, because what does the protocol of history say? Whatever you want to say, you have to produce proof for that. So the historians work like scientists. Like for them they have the different tools. They do the experiments using different tools. Now for a historian, these are the tools you need to have those documents along with you to prove your point. You just can't say and go in, someday and say that this is happening because of this. Now, this has to be proved by something with some documentary proof. Now, that is what it was lacking with these two scholars who were from geography and economics field. Now, obviously, they linked their knowledge with the observation and they came up with a hypothesis, which was, in fact, very correct. But then what does a historian do? I think, historians have learned from all these observations of the 19th century or even earlier. Many other observations from different other places were also given by different geographers and, other scholars. But, historians learn from these observations. And, over the period of time, history has actually matured so much that in terms of the use of the variety of sources, I mean, as you know, your teacher must be telling you all about the different sources of history. So we have different variety of sources for us. But over a period of time, historians have actually broadened their field of, use of the sources. Now, the sources are not confined to what Ranke used to say. I think we should not go into the details what Ranke was saying, but in very general normal terminology, what Ranke was suggesting in the 19th century was that we should use certain given sources for writing. But historians have moved ahead from that. Now they have started using different variety of sources. So now, because history has matured so much, we are better placed to write the histories of these changes in nature now. So, the kind of natural events that I'm talking about, which your principal also suggested, these events are actually so significant for a historian. They give you a very fertile kind of a field for a historian to work on those. I mean, these were unexplored area of study. I don't know for what reason, but by historians never tried to understand those natural events for many years, many decades. And I think now over the last 2 decades, historians have started working on such fields. In India, there is not much work, although in that field, but in various parts of the world, in Europe or in United States, there have been a lot of work being undertaken by historians, and they are working on these natural events of the past centuries. So history researchers, what are the advantages for history researcher when they look at these catastrophes, these natural events? History researchers have the advantage of dealing with the evidences from the past. We, normally, you talk to any historian, they will talk about these evidences. As I said, that we have the protocols, we have to follow the protocols of writing history. So all the history researchers would have this advantage of dealing with different kinds of evidences from the past. So what we need to do while we write about nature, which is a new field for study for a historian, is that we have to forge the culture of humanities with science. That's the challenge that the historians are facing. But over a period of time, and I'm very actually positive about the kind of studies that are being introduced in universities across India, especially in Delhi University, wherein the students are being exposed to new interdisciplinary studies. I think these are going to be very beneficial for history as a discipline, I think. And ये जो ये जो हम जिसको कहते हैं कि वैज्ञानिकों के जो अनुसंधान है, अब इनको आप उनके अपने तरीके हैं जैसा मैंने बताया, और इतिहासकार के रूप में हमें उनके तरीकों को जानने की जरूरत है। तो वो कैसे, अब हम उनकी मेथोडोलॉजी को नहीं जानने की कोशिश करेंगे कि वो कैसे एक्सपेरिमेंट करते हैं, वो तो उनका काम है। बट एज ए हिस्टोरियन हमें क्या समझना है कि इतिहासकार के रूप में कि जो उन्होंने कंक्लूजन ड्रॉ किए हैं, हम उनको तो कम से कम अपने एविडेंस के रूप में अपने विश्लेषण में इस्तेमाल करें। तो यूं कहें कि जो हम पर्यावरण इतिहास जिसको कहते हैं, एनवायरमेंटल हिस्ट्री जिसको कहते हैं, तो पर्यावरण इतिहास का जो ये रिसर्च है, इसमें ये महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है कि ये जो मैंने कहा ना, ह्यूमैनिटीज और साइंस की जो ये दो कल्चर्स हैं, दो संस्कृतियां हैं, उसको हमको जोड़ के इस्तेमाल करना है। तो जो हमें क्या करना है कि इतिहास की जो पारंपरिक सीमाएं हैं, जो, और ये सीमाएं तो हमने खुद ही बांध रखी है ना, कि हमें इस एविडेंस को इतिहास का हिस्सा मानना है और इस एविडेंस को इतिहास का हिस्सा नहीं मानना है। अब जैसे पिछले 20 वर्षों में इतिहासकार जो है वर्नाकुलर सोर्स को तो इतिहास का हिस्सा ही नहीं मानते थे। अब पिछले 20 वर्षों में इतिहासकार वर्नाकुलर सोर्सेस तो बहुत काम करने लगे। तो ये क्या होता है, इसी को तो कहते हैं कि हिस्ट्री में कैसे हिस्ट्री प्रोग्रेस कर रहा है। तो अब जो नया अध्ययन है, अब जो नए प्रकार का अध्ययन शुरू हुआ है, उसमें इतिहासकार जो वैज्ञानिकों के द्वारा जो रिसर्च की, जो कंक्लूजन ड्रॉ किए गए हैं, उनको भी अपने हम अनुसंधान में शामिल करते हैं, जिसको हम एक तरीके से कह सकते हैं एक तरह का इंटरडिसिप्लिनरी अध्ययन जो है हमें करना पड़ता है जब हम इस तरह का एनवायरमेंटल हिस्ट्री लिखते हैं। इनफैक्ट you would get a reflection of this kind of interdisciplinarity in all my stories and the case studies that I am going to present before you today. Now, as we know that the history is basically what? History is basically a saga of change. So हम लोग जब हिस्ट्री पढ़ते हैं, इतिहास पढ़ते हैं, तो हमेशा उसमें बात करते हैं कि क्या क्या बदलाव हुए, है ना। अगर if you know if people and the world around us they remain the same from year to year, there would be no history. So no history would be written. कोई इतिहास नहीं लिखा जाएगा, कोई हम उसको पढ़ेगा भी नहीं. So इतिहास तभी पढ़ने के लिए हम लोग उत्सुक होते हैं या लिखने के लिए उत्सुक होते हैं, और फिर उसको लोग भी पढ़ते हैं जब उसमें कुछ बदलाव देखते हैं, है ना. So change is in fact an some kind of an inescapable phenomena for a history, and it occurs not only in human society but also in various nature aspects. So जब नेचर को हम पढ़ते हैं तो नेचर भी तो स्टेबल नहीं है ना, नेचर भी फिक्स्ड नहीं है कि ऐसा ही रहेगा. नदी तो फिक्स है, हवा भी फिक्स्ड है, ये धरती भी फिक्स्ड है, लेकिन ये जो नदी, हवा, धरती, इन सारे चीजों में भी बदलाव आते रहते हैं. सो उन बदलावों को कौन पढ़ेगा, और अब तक ऐसा क्यों हुआ, ये बड़े आश्चर्य की बात है कि हम उस बदलाव को पढ़ने की कोशिश नहीं करते. सो sometimes the changes in this nature that I'm talking about, they come in the form of catastrophes, right? So what we call as the natural catastrophes. And I'm not suggesting, when I'm saying that we should study these natural changes or the natural events, I'm not suggesting or talking about some kind of environmental determinism. हम ये नहीं कह रहे कि ये जो नेचुरल इवेंट्स है वो डिटरमिन करता है आगे के ह्यूमन के इतिहास को. जो इतिहास क्या है कि अगर जब ह्यूमन एलिमेंट उसमें होता है ना, ह्यूमन बदलाव जब देखते हैं उसको इतिहास कहते हैं. सिर्फ नेचर अगर आइसोलेशन में उस बदलाव को पढ़ेंगे ना, बिना ह्यूमन को डाले, तो वो इतिहास नहीं है. अगर हम ये कहते हैं कि एक फ्लड आया, एक बहुत बड़ा कैटास्ट्रोफी आया, फ्लड आया, तो फ्लड आया और चला गया, वो फ्लड फिर इतिहास नहीं है. फ्लड के को समझना इतिहास नहीं है. वो फ्लड का इतिहास तब बनेगा जब आपको मनुष्य के साथ उसके संबंध को, उसके रिलेशन को एस्टैब्लिश करेंगे. यानी फ्लड आया तो मनुष्य को कैसे प्रभावित किया. तो वो जो इतिहास फिर लिखते हैं हम, जब उसमें ह्यूमन एलिमेंट डाल देते हैं उस नेचुरल इवेंट्स में, तब वो इस हिस्ट्री का हिस्सा बन जाता है. सो बेसिकली जब हम ये कहते हैं कि भाई ये नेचुरल इवेंट्स हुए, तो उसके बाद ये बदलाव आए, तो उससे कहने का तात्पर्य बिल्कुल नहीं है हमारा कि ये नेचुरल इवेंट्स हमारे आगे के प्रोग्रेस को, मतलब मनुष्य के प्रोग्रेस को डिटरमिन कर रहे हैं. क्योंकि फिर मनुष्य क्या करता है कि सरवाइव करने के लिए उस बदले हुए सिचुएशन में भी कुछ बदलाव लाने की कोशिश करता है. सो मनुष्य का जो ये बदलने का तरीका है, ये बदलने की जो प्रवृत्ति है, वो आती रहती है, और इसीलिए ये किसी भी तरीके से एक डिटर्मिनिस्टिक हिस्ट्री नहीं होती है ना. सो but obviously certainly these natural events force humans to make certain kind of cultural and economic choices because they want to survive, they want to progress. And many times these natural events appear quite natural, or you will see that you won't find it unusual, anything unusual about it. अब जैसे हम कह रहे हैं ना कि बाढ़ आ गई, अर्थक्वेक आ गया, तो अब हम क्या करें इसमें, ये तो सब नेचुरल है। लेकिन और उससे लगता है कि जब अर्थक्वेक आ गया तो इसमें एक्सप्लेनेशन की क्या जरूरत है, लेकिन जब उसका इम्पैक्ट होता है तो उसके एक्सप्लेनेशन को समझना जरूरी है, उसका जो इम्पैक्ट है उसको समझना जरूरी होता है। सो on many occasions, you will find that a close reading of these natural catastrophes, they suggest, different kind of, in many cases, they are the result of anthropogenic changes, and in many cases, they are, although very natural, they occur because of natural forces, but then, the humans have to make adjustments to adjust to that catastrophe, right? So in order to survive in the changed circumstances, we come up with alternative patterns in what we call as historical time periods. Now, the natural events, whether natural or it's anthropogenic, हम anthropogenic कहते हैं जब मनुष्य जो है वो उसके द्वारा जो बदलाव लाए गए, उससे कोई नेचर में जो बदलाव आता है उसको हम एंथ्रोपोजेनिक चेंज कहते हैं। सो ये जो भले ही कोई घटना यानी प्राकृतिक घटना वो नेचुरल रही हो या एंथ्रोपोजेनिक हो, in both the cases the humans have to actually adapt to the changes, and what he does, he adapts to those changes by altering the pattern of their societies. So understanding these the changing social and economic or even the cultural aspects and keeping in the context of nature is basically the kind of study the environmental historians do. And unlike many other histories, the study of this kind, what we call as environmental history, is also edifying in some way, because understanding the environmental experience of the past also, it helps us in dealing with the threats of the present. So whatever we are facing today, this kind of a reading, this kind of an understanding of the past centuries, or the understanding of the catastrophe of the past centuries, it allows us to make informed choices for the future. तो हमारे पास जब बहुत सारी जानकारियां रहेंगी पुराने पास्ट स्टडी को लेकर, तो ऑब्वियसली पास्ट कैटेस्ट्रोफी को केवल हम उसके फेस वैल्यू पर देख के कि भाई ये तो नेचर के द्वारा आया था और चला गया, तो फिर बहुत हमारे लिए फ्यूचर में प्लानिंग करने में बहुत आसानी नहीं होगी। तो हम क्या करते हैं, हिस्टोरियन जब उसके ऊपर स्टडी करता है, क्योंकि जब घटना घट जाएगी तो उसके बाद बहुत सी चीजें होंगी, है ना। जैसे बिहार में 1935 में एक अर्थक्वेक आया, भयानक अर्थक्वेक आया, तो उसके बाद क्या क्या हुआ वो समझना बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि अर्थक्वेक एक जो कॉमन फिनोमेना आजकल हो गया है, उसको समझकर हम ये बता सकते हैं, पॉलिसी मेकर्स उसको पढ़कर ये समझ सकते हैं। हिस्टोरियन का टास्क ये नहीं है कि पॉलिसी मेकर्स को अपनी पॉलिसीज उसमें बताए, हिस्टोरियन का टास्क केवल प्रॉब्लम्स को बताकर छोड़ देना है, बट पॉलिसी मेकर्स उसको एक लर्निंग के रूप में लेकर और अपनी नई पॉलिसीज बना सकते हैं। सो दैट्स हाउ आई से दैट द वर्क्स of environmental historians are also in some way edifying. Now, today, I'm going to tell you a few fascinating stories, the stories which are related to natural events of the past centuries. While we deal with a few of the landmark catastrophes, which we also call as natural calamities, I would also tell you how they have had a remarkable impact on human history. All right. So you would observe that there is some kind of an uncanny resemblance in terms of their, immediate understanding among the contemporary academia. So, but for environmental historians, as environmental history has progressed as a discipline, as I was telling you, historians have over the past 2 decades, they have successfully, very successfully reviewed the earlier positions. So जो उसके बारे में पुरानी जानकारियां थी उन कैटास्ट्रोफीज के बारे में, वो पिछले 2 दशक में जो नए वर्क आए, 2-3 दशकों में, उसने पूरे हमारे अंडरस्टैंडिंग को बदल दिया है नेचुरल इवेंट्स के. So what I've done is that I picked up 3 major natural events, and these are one each from 18th century, 19th century, and 20th century. They all came very surprisingly in April, almost 100 years apart. Though I must tell you that April month से इसका कोई लेना देना नहीं है, कोई correlation नहीं है. There is no, I mean, all these occurrences have no correlation, absolutely. Just एक ऑब्जर्वेशन के दौरान मैंने ये पाया कि ये जो तीनों कैटेस्ट्रोफीज है 18वीं, 19वीं और 20वीं शताब्दी की, ये तीनों के तीनों अप्रैल महीने से जुड़ी हैं, और करीब करीब इन तीनों कैटेस्ट्रोफी को मैंने जो सिलेक्ट किया है वो इसमें लगभग 100 वर्षों का अंतर है. सो इसका कोई रिलेशनशिप नहीं है कि हर कैटेस्ट्रोफी इस तरह का जो है 100 साल के बाद आया है. लेकिन जो पहला केस स्टडी है वो एक ईस्टर आइलैंड है, which is located in the Pacific Ocean. Let me show you a slide. Can I? You have given me the permission to share the slide, no?
Yes, sir.
So is it there on your screen? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now
Visible.
you look at this. Yeah. So this is the Easter Island, right? And it is located on the western part of South America. And this is a kind of a shape that we have of this Easter Island, right? Now you will find, आप देखेंगे कि इस ईस्टर आइलैंड का जो सबसे महत्वपूर्ण चीज है कि इस पूरे ईस्टर आइलैंड में इस तरह के स्टैच्यूज पूरे कोस्ट पर बिखरा हुआ है. अब तो उसको सजा के रख दिया गया है क्योंकि टूरिस्ट अट्रैक्शन है ये, बट इस तरह के स्टैच्यूज पूरे चारों तरफ उस आइलैंड में है, और यही इस आइलैंड की खास बात है, राइट? नाउ यू नो ये जो ईस्टर आइलैंड जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, ये आज के डेट में चिली का हिस्सा है. चिली जो देश है तो पैसिफिक ओशन में उसके कंट्रोल में है ये, और इट इज काइंड ऑफ सम 2000 miles वेस्ट ऑफ चिली मेनलैंड. सो जो साउथ अमेरिका में चिली देश है उससे करीब 2000 मील दूर है पैसिफिक ओशन में, समुद्र में. Now, the most remarkable thing about this island, as I told you, is these hundreds of statues all around the island, and they are almost similar in shape, though not exactly in size. But some of the statues have very similar weight, and most of these statues actually weigh between 75 to 100 tons. And the largest, the tallest among them, the statues, is somewhere around 12 meters. So you can imagine these are huge statues, must have been carved out of big, huge chunk of stone. And these statues are actually decorated with what is known as pukhao at that place. It's kind of a soft red stone in the shape of a hat. So in most of these statues you will find that there is the statue is having some kind of a headgear. Now these statues also have many of these statues are lying near the quarries. But then you also have these statues and their torso buried beneath the head, uh, inside the earth. Now, obviously, when the research started coming up over the last few decades, the archaeological excavations were undertaken, and the archaeologists suggested that somewhere around 20,000 to 30,000 people actually lived on the island once. So, I mean, these are based on some kind of a uh, uh, statistical data that the archaeologists came up with of different utensils and the goods that they were using, and also the various skull remains that they found. Now, once this kind of once this land was, obviously the island was populated with such a huge population, but in one of the surveys done by a European explorer in 1772, it was suggested that the population was just around 2,000 people, because he went inside the island, and various ranches were established. The Europeans went there and established their ranches for their sheep. And then he suggested that some 2,000 people were, he mentioned that in his diary, that some 2,000 people were living at around 1772. Now, the kind of figure which was given by the archaeologists was from the 17th century. They said that till about 17th century, there were some 20,000 to 30,000 people living in that area. Now, what happened exactly in the 18th century that it completely, the entire population completely collapsed and most of the people died? So mystery remained for many centuries about, the sudden collapse of a major human population of an isolated island. Now, it was certainly a catastrophe for the island. It was a catastrophe which was known as a catastrophe of Easter Island. And in fact, there was a BBC documentary also made with the title called The Mystery of the Easter Island. The collapse was explained by many explorers of the time as some kind of a natural phenomena. And in fact, in 1722, there was a Dutch explorer who went there. His name was Jacob Roggeveen, who accidentally sailed to this Easter Island. And he was the one who had named this island as the Easter Island because it was the day of Easter, 5th April, on which date he actually bumped into this island. Now, in his diary, he mentions that he was astonished to see the huge statues all around the coastline. But at the same time, he also observed that there are, various kind of human skulls and bones all around, indicating some kind of a sudden death. Now, obviously, people believe he was, just because he was the first European explorer, the kind of work that came up in the 20th century, they all said that possibly there was some kind of a natural calamity which led to the sudden death in this island. But then, when the historians took up this task of doing a research on Easter Island, they obviously used the archaeological excavation as one of the prime evidence. But then they also tried to study Roggeveen's diary very closely. And they found that he had also mentioned that the entire island is devoid of trees. Now, very late in the 20th century, there was a study which was undertaken. This was perhaps one of the first studies done on the Easter Island by a historian. His name was uh, Jared Diamond, and he wrote a very interesting book. This was titled as The Collapse. And in that book, Collapse, he argued that this sudden death of the Eastern Island uh, was caused by the overpopulation, and also because of the poor use of the resources, which in fact he says that, ultimately in his analysis, he argues that, some kind of cannibalism came here. तो लोग एक दूसरे को मार कर खाने लग गए और फिर पूरा population जो है तबाह हो गया. Now he has his own, just because he was a historian, he, like a historian, used the archaeological evidences to suggest that there was a huge population here. But then while he argues for the downfall, he has his own way of arguing it. And, for him, the reason was that the people themselves were responsible for the huge death. According to him, the people of Easter Island, the people of Easter Island, they actually destroyed their forests to move these heavy statues. He said that the very culture of erecting these huge statues was disastrous. It was the reason behind, the collapse. And he says that, these statues could not have been moved without the technology of moving that. And the technology available at that time was through the rolling of the logs. So all these big forests, it took many years, many months to, to carve out these huge statues, because this was a belief system of the Easter Island people. Once they carved it out, they cut a wood, they cut a huge tree, logs were taken out, and then these logs were used to, roll it towards the coast. So this is how, the forests were cut, and more statues, the belief of making more and more statues did not stop, and so did the forest. So forests were also cut a lot to move all these big, heavy statues to the coastal regions. Now, Jared Diamond was actually very convincing when he argued that. So according to him, it was some kind of a self-inflicted environmental devastation. So its society collapsed because of the self-inflicted reasons. So in this situation, what happens that once you remove the forest, the topsoil of the island was also removed, because the soils of that island were held together by all these trees and various plants. Now these were, once they were removed, the agricultural production also came down. Once there were heavy rainfall, all the topsoil would go into the sea now, because there are no trees. So the agricultural production went down. Just because it was an isolated island, there was no foreign contact, there was nobody coming from outside, nothing could have been brought in. So ultimately what happened, when you have a food crisis, people started killing one another. So the Jared Diamond says that once this happened, people were so engrossed with this belief system of erecting the statues that they removed the entire forest area of the island, and this led to cannibalism. But new studies, over the last 1 decade has been undertaken by few environmental historians, and 2 of them are quite prominent, and they have come up with a very new evidence. The new evidence, and these new evidences have certainly reversed the whole hypothesis which was given by Jared Diamond. Now, what are these new evidences? The new evidences suggest that the population of Easter Island declined not due to the log cutting. So as Jared Diamond was saying that, ये जो forest है ये पूरा का पूरा काटना पड़ा था क्योंकि लोग स्टैचू को रिमूव करने के लिए उसको तो रोल करके ही ले जा सकते थे, तो लॉग के ऊपर उसको रख देते थे और रोल करके कोस्टल।
सर आपका माइक म्यूट हो गया है। हेलो, यस सर।
हेलो,
यस सर, अब ठीक है।
कैन यू हियर मी नाउ?
यस सर।
ओके, सो तो मैं बता रहा था कि जेरन डायमंड ने जो बताया है कि जो फॉरेस्ट को काटना पड़ा और सारे वुड्स को इस्तेमाल किया गया और जिसके कारण एग्रीकल्चर प्रोडक्शन नीचे चला गया, उसको पूरा रिवर्स कर दिया नए एविडेंसेस में। नाउ हिस्टोरियंस ने ये जो नया एविडेंस है वो कहां से बटोरा, ये कहां से लेकर आए? नाउ 20 years ago there was a study done on this technology of moving the statues, heavy statues, and this technology suggested otherwise. They suggested that these statues were not actually moved horizontally as Zaret Diamond was suggesting, that the statues were first brought down through the quarries, and there was it was horizontally put on the logs and then rolled towards the coastal area. They suggested that it was actually some kind of a vertical movement which was done with the statues. And they said that the statues were tied at the neck with the ropes, and then they were moved like this and then taken to the coast. That means there were no logs used at all. Now, and this was proven with some kind of a replica which was created by these physics scientists, and the conclusive evidence that they provided, this was used by then the historians to come up with their own new hypothesis. Now, when it was proven wrong by physics, and it was suggested that the statue actually were moved with vertical movement technology, the whole hypothesis got reversed. And these two historians, their name is Carl Lippo and Terry Hunt. They wrote a very interesting book few years ago that is titled as The Statue That Walked. And in that book, they argued that the collapse was not self-inflicted as was understood earlier, but it was due to the European contact. And they then used the diary, the evidences provided by the diary of Jacob Roggeveen. So they said that the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, who first sighted the island in 1722, after he went back to Europe, he wrote this diary and then shared his view, shared his new discovery with many people around. And then after that, many European explorers came here and took away many of the Rapa Nui people as slaves. Then he also found evidences of many ranches being established on this island. Now, the result of all this was that the Rapa Nui people, the original inhabitants of the island, they were not immune to many of the diseases of the mainland, like the smallpox, the flu, and the typhus or the measles. All these were new diseases, and the Rapa Nui people were not exposed to these diseases. So once they come in contact with the Europeans, it led to massive death of the Rapa Nui people. So it was some kind of an ecological genocide, right? So you come in contact with an isolated group of people, and you are already carrier of various kinds of diseases, although you are not infected as such, but then you are carriers of those diseases, and this led to the infection to those isolated people who were not immune to these diseases. So it was not not some kind of ecological suicide as it was suggested by Jared Diamond, but it was an ecological genocide in some sense. Now, this is the first case study that we have. Now, the second one is rather very interesting, and it is also actually associated with Indian situation and the area of study that I work on. This is a catastrophe which is famous as the Tambora disaster. Now, this Tambora is actually it's a volcano which is located on the Sumbawa Island in Indonesia. I'll just share the slide to show you the location. So this is the one. This is located in Indonesia, and this is part of Indonesia, and this is located in this is Mount Tambora. It is here that in 1815 there was a massive volcanic eruption, and this Mount Tambora actually blew up with catastrophic force. And obviously, as I said earlier, that the month was April itself. So it also came in April 1815. अगर देखा जाए तो डेट अगर ये 1815 का जो वोल्केनिक इरप्शन है टम्बोरा का, इतिहासकार बताते हैं और जो बहुत सारे एविडेंसेस हैं हमारे पास के, वो बताते हैं कि इट इज the largest eruption in recorded human history. मतलब इतना बड़ा volcanic eruption कभी नहीं हुआ था. This volcanic eruption of 1815, it was so very massive, that the weather pattern of the entire globe at that time was disturbed by the ashes that came out from that volcano. In fact, it is one recorded geological event from history that had a very cascading impact throughout the world. In fact, in many of the paintings of that time, in all around the globe of that period, the artists have actually portrayed the gloomy atmosphere in their paintings. That everywhere there is a dust around and there is no light. So, in fact, many of the novels that were written during those years were having Tambora disaster at the center of their plot. In fact, after this volcanic eruption in 1815, within weeks, the Tambora ashes, the volcanic ashes, and the ash cloud, it spread in the stratosphere, and it circled the entire planet around the equator and in the tropics. So even India was affected by the volcanic ashes at that time. Many of the the sky watchers of that period, they have they actually have seen the imprint of this kind of a major atmospheric change in many of they look at this imprint in many of their studies, and they observed that there was some kind of cooling of temperature at that time happening after the Tambora disaster. They did not realize that this, at that time, in different parts of the globe, they did not realize that there is a connection of this kind of a volcanic eruption with that of cooling of the temperature. But the kind of ashes that they observed during those days, they could figure out that something wrong had happened, and because of that, this kind of a change is being observed. But none of the observers of the time realized that nearly 3 years of the destructive global cooling that had occurred, it's because of a far away volcanic eruption that had taken place in Indonesia. Now, in a recent research, it has been concluded that any volcanic eruption of this kind could actually linger. The ashes which come out from these volcanic eruptions, they can linger above the earth for up to 3 years. And on that basis, and on the basis of various evidences that come from different parts of the globe and different tropical regions, wherein people have shared their views about the kind of environment that they are facing, the kind of weather they are facing, they have suggested, and obviously with the recent study of the scientists, that when a major volcanic eruption takes place, the ashes remain in the stratosphere for 2-3 years. So, I mean, this study, along with the evidences from the past, they have been brought together, and it has been suggested now that the Tambora eruption that came in 1850, the ashes which came out from the atmosphere, it remained at least for 3 years in the atmosphere. So Tambora eruption virtually led to changes in the weather, changes in the climate. So there was some kind of anomaly in the climate at that time. There is a very interesting work by a historian, environmental historian. His name is Zealand Wood, and he has written a book with the same title, Tambora. And he says that this Tambora eruption was some kind of a volcanic steel bomber of the 19th century. Zealand Wood actually is his book. If you read that book, it's very interesting book. He has given, collected information from different countries, and then suggested this. And he has tried to study the impact of this volcanic eruption in different parts of the world. Now, he says that when he was working as an environmental historian about this volcanic eruption of 1815, it was a challenge to him, because it was very difficult to collect information as such related to volcanic eruption, because people in far off areas never understood that the kind of weather that they are observing, it is happening because of the Tambora eruption. So he uses various scientific conclusions during his study, all the scientific conclusions that were drawn by the scientists. He used those conclusions as evidences to come up with his own hypothesis. He says that the Tambora eruption that happened in 1815, the impact of that was felt till 1818. So for 3 continuous years, there were extreme weathers which were being faced by different parts of the world. Now, while he did his study, obviously he does not specifically mention about the region of the Ganges or the mid-Gangetic areas. But if you look at the various evidences from India, of 1815 and onwards, especially 1815, 16, and 17, you would find that in many of the documents, these years have been seen as a year without a monsoon. That is, the monsoon was affected in those 2-3 years after the Tambora eruption happened, and this kind of a climate anomaly was observed throughout the world. In fact, there were the effect of this kind of a climate anomaly was felt in different parts of the agricultural zones. Also, the agricultural production of different parts of the world were affected because of the Tambora volcanic eruption. And many of the places of the earth actually faced famines or diseases and different other varieties of problems. Now, if you look at the reasons of mid-Ganga area like Bihar, or the lower Gangetic region of Bengal. Now, this was an area which was affected by cholera at that time. Now, obviously, if you study the literatures of the time, you will find that they don't really tell you about any connection of Tambora with cholera. But there is actually a connection between the Tambora volcanic eruption and the cholera epidemic that came in 1816. Now, Tambora and the ashes of the Tambora actually arrived over the Bay of Bengal, and it came within few days. So what happened that if you try to take the evidences from various coastal regions of India at that time, so we have many of the colonial records which talk about the temperature, which tell us about the temperature in many of the explorers' account. You will find the temperatures of that region, the eastern coast of India, and they suggest that there was a drastic reduction or fall in the early morning temperature of those regions, the coastal regions. So in April, once the temperature in the Gangetic Basin, it is estimated that it came down from early morning temperature I'm talking about. It came down to as low as 5 to 10 degrees centigrade in many of the eastern coastal area. Now, this is a huge decline of the early morning temperature if we talk about. So this happened in 1816. It also, if you look at the documents of the time, it also suggests that in that year of Tambora, there was a monsoon failure, and the monsoon in the year 1815 and subsequently in 1816, there were absolutely no rains taking place, and this led to famine-like situation in most parts of India. So, I mean, there is obviously a correlation between the Tambora volcanic eruption and the monsoon failure. Now, obviously, how do a historian come up with evidences to prove his point that there is a connection between Tambora and the monsoon failure in 1815 and 16? A historian uses the modern scientific evidences to prove his point. So the modern scientific evidences suggest that when a volcanic eruption would take place in and around the Indian Ocean, the monsoon gets affected for next 2-3 years. Now, this volcanic eruption of this scale, like the Tambora, which would lead to, I mean, there was a study which was done in 1980s, which suggested that volcanic eruption of this magnitude and the ashes which came out from this volcanic eruption, this disturbed the monsoon pattern of the Indian Ocean. Now, the modern study of this kind, where we can use this modern study and the conclusion of these modern studies, and then replicate it to 18, 15, 16 situations, just because, you know, there has been evidences before us, different other, you know, different evidences from different regions of India, which suggests that there has been a monsoon failure in 18, 15, 16. Modern study says that there is a connection between the volcanic eruption and the failure of the monsoon. We have no direct evidence of a Tambora connection with the monsoon failure in 18, 15, 16, but the situation, the circumstances suggest towards that connection, right? So we as historians, what do? We use these modern evidences to prove our point, right? Now, it so happened, the more interesting thing is about the cholera connection, that how, when there is a monsoon failure, how did it actually lead to the cholera? Now, there is a very interesting document which was written in 1820 at that time by a medical scientist at that time about the cholera epidemic. And he actually, this man was Jameson. He actually recorded and explained the cholera epidemic in his report, and he traced the cause of the 1817 cholera that came. He said that this cholera epidemic came because of the abnormalities in the Bengal climate for 2 consecutive years. So he said that the failure of the monsoon for 2 consecutive years actually has some kind of a connection with, you know, the cholera outbreak that came in 1816 and 1817 together. Now, Jameson's this classical 1820 report about which he actually presented to the Calcutta Medical Board, it also includes a very interesting, some 100 odd pages of description about the state of weather which was there in 1815, 16 months. And he argued that in those months, the pathogen of the disease were airborne, and therefore it is spread by a strangely humid atmosphere, which was driven at that time by drought and then unusual winds that were blowing in those 2 years. Now, obviously, he's not very particular about this connection between the Tambora volcanic eruption and its connection with cholera. But as I said, that we as historians today, what we do is that we use all these scattered evidences. We bring all these scattered evidences together and we read it along with the modern scientific conclusions. So the modern scientific conclusions are much more interesting. Let me tell you before that we move that, in fact, this kind of an argument or this kind of a connection of such kind between a weather anomaly or a climate anomaly with cholera, which was suggested by Jameson in 1820, it was actually thrown into the dustbin by new researches which was given by Robert Koch at that time. This man Robert Koch was obviously his discovery was very based on pathological studies, and he did a very specific study of the cholera bacteria in Calcutta pond. But his understanding was that it's some kind of a human to human transmission that leads to the cholera epidemic. Now, obviously, this remained one of the most dominant theory of the spread of cholera epidemic for the entire late 19th and early 20th century. But in the 21st century, new researches came on the cholera epidemic and its connection with the climate anomaly. In fact, the new researches of the 21st century actually have given some kind of a credibility to Jameson's model, his model of the climate disease, climate connection with the disease cholera. So it suggests that when there are monsoon failures, there are certain cholera bacteria which are there in the Gangetic environment, in the water bodies of the Gangetic region. The cholera was already present in the form of what he calls as zooplankton and the protozoa. And what happens that when there is a monsoon failure because in monsoon, when there is a monsoon which is normal, there it leads to a lot of flood in those rivers of Gangetic, Bihar and Bengal. And then these cholera they don't actually look for any host, or they are not able to get any host in humans. But the moment there is a failure of the rainfall, what happens that these cholera find the cholera vibrio, what they call, they found their host in the humans. And this leads, this is a recent research which suggests that there is a connection of the monsoon failures with cholera. Now, on the basis of the various evidences that we have, that there was a Tambora volcanic eruption in 1815, then you have evidence which suggested that the volcanic ashes came all around the Bay of Bengal. It disturbed the Indian monsoon, and then you have the monsoon failure and the famine taking place. And then you also have, during those same years, the cholera epidemic spreading. This has actually led historians to connect all these evidences together and prove that there was a connection between Tambora volcanic eruption and cholera epidemic in 1816 and 17. Now, if very quickly, what I will do is that I will give you a very interesting third of my cases, or maybe during the discussion we can take up this third case study. I would stop here and we can carry on further when our discussion take place. I would request the admin here to please look for some questions if there are online, or maybe somebody wants to raise some issues, questions, or maybe they have their observations about this theme. They're welcome. Yes, Bhuvan.
Thank
you
you
so much
for providing us
Yeah,
this
Meena will take over.
significant insight on the topic. This was really interesting and we learned a lot. We would now move on to the question and answer session, and the audience may now unmute and ask their questions or throw down your questions in the chat box.
Yeah, Akash, please.
So good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. In the midst of the pandemic, the nature has taught us that it is much, much bigger than any humanity, or it is bigger than any species whatsoever inhabits the earth. But you raised the question about policy making in the first half of the lecture, and somehow I was kind of interested in knowing about something that is we called as the induced natural events, man-made induced natural events. If we take into consideration somewhat like the Koina Dam disaster, that how later on, of course, the environmentalists, the historians, they brought up the fact that in 1967, when the Koina disaster took place in Maharashtra, it was a non-seismic region, but it was induced seismological activities that happened in the fault line of the Koina River because of the dam building process that has led to a series of earthquakes happening in those areas. And in connection to that, of course, to the reports that were submitted by the environmentalists and the historians, somewhat came up the aspect of Silent River Valley project in Kerala as well, on the Allappuzha River, which was basically a biological hotspot for a very long time. And then how Mrs. Gandhi's government had to shelve the project when the environmentalists had raised this question that it might lead to another Koina disaster altogether if we are going to go ahead with it, and the tiger population getting thinner and thinner because of certain man-made or human-induced activities. So what would you say about the man-made interventions into nature that has led to induced natural events, and what are your thoughts about it? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, very interesting. Forgot your name. Yes, Akash. So, very important and interesting question, Akash. Actually, in many of the catastrophes that we historians have been doing and we have been studying, in many of the catastrophes, you will find that there are actually, the reasons behind those catastrophes are man-made, what we call as anthropogenic. One of the obvious cases that you were telling us, it's certainly one of the reasons what the historians have been suggesting, that we should not be doing all that. And a very interesting case is of the 1930s dust bowl, which because of the paucity of time, I was not able to tell you. But we have, huge number of evidences from different parts of the world. Like, Stalin in Russia came up with a great Stalin plan. And what he did that he took up this task of planting the entire southern part of Russia with the huge trees. This was his grand plan. What he wanted that he observed that there was a dry wind which was coming from China and which was destroying the crops of the southern plains of Russia, USSR at that time. So he said that let's plant all these big trees which will be kind of an obstruction to these trees, to these dry winds which are destroying our crops. Now, one of the repercussion, one of the major repercussions of that was that there were many rivulets which were diverted to these trees because they wanted these trees to grow. And also because earlier these southern parts or the southern plain area were dry grasslands, now they were converted into agricultural lands because now you've created all these barriers so that there are no dry years coming in. So what has happened is that you have stopped all these rivulets to go into different lakes in those areas. Now, this is one case study. So the other one is obviously the case of the Great Plain area of United States. This is a Great Plain area where you have this 1930s dust bowl taking place. The entire decade of the 1930s was full of dust storms. And the situation was so precarious that people had to leave the area. They had to migrate, what is popularly known in United States as the Okies migration. So, as a historian, when a historian does the study of that kind, this was done, there was a very interesting work done by Donald Worcester on that. He wrote a book, in fact, with the same title, The Dust Bowl. Before him, it was believed that the Dust Bowl occurred because of some kind of a natural catastrophe. It's a kind of a natural catastrophe, and there's no human intervention due to which this kind of a Dust Bowl occurred in the United States. But Donald Worcester went back into the past, almost a century back, and then told us that there is actually a human involvement in this Dust Bowl phenomena. So then he tells you all about how the Great Plain area was acquired from Napoleon Bonaparte, which was purchased as some form of, it was known as the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon. Napoleon wanted a whole lot of money to fight war with England. So he sold this and the huge stretch of land, which was a grassland, to the United States, and then under Jefferson and various other even Lincoln and various other people, the land was expanded. It was distributed to the people coming from settled in the eastern coast of area, and then huge agricultural progress started. Tractors were then introduced. So this land, which was not actually suitable for agricultural production, was intensively cultivated. So what you've done is that you've loosened the soil. So when there was a dry wind which was blowing from that area, it then came into the skies. And it so happened that the dust actually was so thin that it entered into the dog, it entered into your houses, the kind of bread you were eating were also having dust into it. So people had to leave that area for almost a decade. When the situation continues, people have to leave, and all those people having huge agricultural land with them, they became landless completely, and they moved to California. So you have many of the case studies from different parts of the world, which suggest that there has been behind these catastrophes, there is actually human involvement into it. And I think that whatever we do today, I mean, it's a kind of a learning for us. So we, as I said, that as historian, our task is just to indicate to the problems, and we don't actually talk about the policies. But the policy makers have to learn from the whatever problems that the historians actually come up with, or they indicate about the problems from the past. They can take it as a learning while they frame policies for the future.
Thank you, sir.
So I would also like to ask, or have a clarification on this Easter Island case study that you've done. What you've tried to put across is that there were around 20,000 to 30,000 people living in this Easter Island in 17th century, and while the population declined in the 18th century, it declined. It came down to 2,000. And when the Spanish voyager, when he visited this island, there were skulls all over. So how is it?
He was a Dutch, yeah.
Dutch scholar. When he visited this island, there were skulls. He found these skulls and all. So how is it that the collapse happened? If the collapse happens because of this interaction with the outside world, after the coming of the Europeans in this area, because of the diseases and all. So how did he come across these skulls in when he visited? That's something which I was wondering.
Obviously you're right. Good question. Right. This I said that the historians did a very close reading of those sources, and the same diaries which were read earlier by many other people. When a historian reads them, he reads those diaries, those evidences, along with many other evidences. So many other European explorers had also gone to the island, and they had written their own diaries. So when you put them together, I mean, there was something which Jacob Roggeveen had not mentioned, that he did not go inside the island. He remained only in the coastal areas. And it is there that he found those the remains of the human bodies. He found those skulls and the bones of the humans. And I mean, we just as Raghaveen has mentioned about that, we don't have to believe what Raghaveen is saying is correct. So what we as historians do is that we then try to figure out through other diaries that what was the real situation. So if you read the various other diaries of the Europeans who had gone there, you will find that these Europeans mention about the control or allotment of land inside the Easter Island. Now, those evidences don't suggest about this kind of a cannibalism which Jared Diamond came up with. Because if there is a cannibalism, then archaeologists would always suggest that in cannibalism there will not be the entire frame of the human body lying there, or it will not be engraved, right? But there should be some evidence in the archaeological excavations about the cut mark, some kind of a cut mark. If there are wars taking place, then there would be some kind of a wound mark on the bones as such, which has not been found in any of the bone structures. So that itself suggests that there was no killing of any kind. And so, I mean, the whole argument about cannibalism actually is now, it has been proven wrong. And of course, I would suggest that one should look at that documentary by BBC about the Easter Island. It's there on the YouTube. It also gives you the idea of the two people and the physics scientists who came up with this understanding. It gives us the understanding of the technology of the movement of those large statues, that how these statues were moved at that time vertically and not horizontally. So the historians use different other evidences to prove their point. That's from where we actually started, that we as historians, just because we are trained as history researchers, we have different advantage of reading these different evidences to come up with this some kind of a conclusive analysis.
So I was also wondering that if you have to prove cannibalism, if you look at the archaeological remains, you'll find, some scraping, some evidence of scraping. So that is something which
right.
So
prove that's not there.
It's not there. Yeah, I also, did, I just, heard about this case sometime. I read about it. So I also was wondering that, if those marks are not there, then how can you actually even suggest cannibalism? So that means he was just, it was a humbug that he was just making that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, I would also like to ask the question. First of all, thank you for such an interesting discussion. See, my question is basically probably not very directly relevant to what you have discussed, but yes, tangentially. I was just wondering, you talked about the cholera pandemic in Bengal because of one of the theory which says that the volcanic eruption in Indonesia might have led it. But the thing is that I have read some of the literature of this region, especially the Mangal Kavyas and all, where there are the regional gods like demi-goddesses who are supposed to cure the people of their of these diseases, and also of this environmental calamities like flood or from drought. So there are gods and goddesses earmarked for particular kind of environmental problem with which they have to fight on everyday basis. So I was just wondering whether we can just explain a bit about the religious philosophy or practice and beliefs are also, environment has an impact on these religious philosophical beliefs. Can we like draw a conclusion like this? Or what is your like idea about this is something which
not exactly in the case of cholera as such, but my reading, in fact, I've mentioned that in one of the book that I wrote 2 years ago about the smallpox and its connection with the the kind of religious practices that we find in Bengal in 18th century. In fact, there is one medical practitioners from England who went to Bengal, and he gave a very good observation about the kind of inoculation that was being undertaken by people in Bengal at that time. And he recorded this from late 18th century. He mentions about the how people have been infected with smallpox, and the pus from the smallpox of a diseased person is then taken out in one of in a small earthen pot, and then the people who are not infected, the non-infected people, are then inoculated with that pus. So he writes that it is from this kind of a observation of inoculation which was prevalent in Bengal in 18th century that he came back and then invented a vaccine of smallpox. I mean, this is a well recorded thing. You can go to archive.org and you will find that document. This kind of a connection is obviously there, especially related to smallpox. You will find that even till very late in Bengal and many parts of Bengal, the Mata, the goddess Mata was being the one who was infected with smallpox was, they were worshipped as Mata. That's Mata has arrived in their home. Now, so far as cholera is concerned, it would be a very interesting study to figure out if there is some kind of a religious practice or belief system connected with cholera. I have till now not come across any, but if there is any, I think it can be a very interesting study, because we have many works of that kind of that period which suggest about the epidemic cholera, because cholera was already endemic in India at that time. It was already existing, but it sometimes it acquired an epidemic proportion when such anomalies came. Anomalies like the monsoon failures for 2-3 years continuously. So I'm not sure that cholera as such was being seen by the people of Bengal as some kind of a catastrophe which has some connection with the religion, or they wanted this cholera to be they wanted to get rid of cholera with some kind of religious belief. And it will be very interesting to do such kind of a study. So thanks for this very good observation, Sumita.
No, thank you. Thank you.
हेलो गुड आफ्टरनून सर माय नेम इज जय सर मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि आपने बताया कि किस तरीके से वॉल्केनिक इरप्शन हुआ तंबोरा में और किस तरीके से एटमॉस्फेयर चेंजेस हुए और फेमाइन्स आई वगैरह वगैरह। तो सर फिर उससे किस तरीके से कॉलेरा आया। तो सर कॉलेरा का एक आने का ये भी कारण तो हो सकता है कि उस समय पर किस तरीके से मतलब एटमॉस्फेयर में चेंजेस हुए, तो बायोडाइवर्सिटी पे कितना इफेक्ट पड़ा उस टाइम पर स्पीसीज एनिमल्स होंगे, तो उस समय पर उनकी भी मतलब काफी हद तक डेथ्स हुई होंगी। तो ये भी तो एक फैक्टर मैटर करता है कि कोलेरा इस वजह से भी काफी हद तक आया होगा। जैसे कि इस वक्त हम देख रहे हैं कि कोविड को जो है कुछ हद तक बताया जाता है कि चीन के लोग कुछ ऐसे तरीके के एनिमल्स खाते थे वगैरह वगैरह। तो मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि इस केस स्टडी में ये जो फैक्टर है बायोडाइवर्सिटी वाला, वो कितना मैटर करता है सर, और कितना इंपॉर्टेंस रखता है अपने आप में?
देखिए, वो तो हुआ तो जरूर होगा, इसमें कोई दो मत नहीं है कि इसका इम्पैक्ट एनिमल्स पर भी आया होगा। और हिस्टोरियन के लिए तो मैंने बताया ना कि हिस्टोरियन तो तभी किसी चीज को नेचर में भी, केवल नेचर को आइसोलेशन में तो पढ़ता नहीं है इतिहासकार। इतिहासकार के लिए जरूरी है कि कोई भी नेचर का एस्पेक्ट हो, भले ही वो एनिमल हो या पेड़ पौधे हो या नदी हो या कुछ भी हो, या वेदर हो या क्लाइमेट हो या किसी तरह की बीमारी हो, सबको अगर मनुष्य के साथ उसके संबंध के परिप्रेक्ष्य में हम पढ़ लें तभी वो इतिहास बनता है, यानी इतिहास हम उसको कहते हैं। अब प्रश्न ये उठता है कि हम इसके लिए एविडेंस, जो बातें आप कह रहे हैं उसमें दम है, लेकिन उसके एविडेंसेस हम कहाँ से लाएं? ये बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है एक इतिहासकार के लिए। तो अब जैसे मनुष्य से संबंधित जो एविडेंसेस है, मैंने बताया ना कि एविडेंसेस तो हमारे सारे थे, स्कैटर्ड फॉर्म में थे, हम लोगों ने उसको कनेक्ट किया एक दूसरे से, और कनेक्ट करके फिर मॉडर्न साइंटिफिक कंक्लूजन के साथ जोड़ा, और तब हम अपने एनालिसिस पर पहुंचे। लेकिन बायोडाइवर्सिटी पर उसका जो इम्पैक्ट है उसको समझने के लिए ऑब्वियसली इसमें स्कोप है, इसको समझने की जरूरत है। लेकिन उसको कैसे समझा जाएगा, ये बहुत डिफिकल्ट और टास्क है, चैलेंज है इतिहासकारों के लिए कि उसके लिए नए तरीके से एविडेंसेस बटोरे जाएं और फिर उस एविडेंस के आधार पर इसको साबित किया जाए। क्योंकि इतिहास में ये बहुत जरूरी है रवि, ये जानना, आप तो इतिहास के विद्यार्थी हैं, कि कोई भी इतिहास केवल बता देने से इतिहास नहीं बन जाता है। ये जरूरी है कि हम कोई भी चीज बता रहे हैं और जो भी कहानियां बुन रहे हैं, उस कहानी के पीछे हम तथ्य को भी दें, हमारे एविडेंस भी होने चाहिए, है ना, उसको साबित भी करना है। तो यही तो हम में और एक साहित्यकार में अंतर है। तो हिंदी का साहित्यकार जब किसी राजा की कहानी को लिखेगा तो वो डिफरेंट तरीके से लिखता है, लेकिन आप और हम जब उस कहानी को लिखेंगे तो दूसरे तरीके से लिखते हैं।
तो सर इस पे अभी तक कोई भी एक भी केस स्टडी नहीं हुई सर?
नहीं, अभी इस पर नहीं हुई है।
थैंक यू सर।
Sir, if I may say something about the same issue that is being talked about Kerala. Sir, I recently came across a study by Koji Kawashima and how he tells us about the state of Travancore and Kochi in the 18th century. And there's a very small outbreak of cholera when the Maharaja of Travancore asked the British missionary that we are going to help you out in certain, we are going to bring some religious policies and religious transformations in our state if you start bringing in Western medicine to help out this smaller outbreak of cholera in Travancore back in the 1858, I think it is the time period. So, but on the other hand, the Maharaja also comes out with an official document stating the people in Travancore that you should also worship Padmanabha Swami, because since you are taking in Western medicine while you are getting treated with it, you are also ingesting that is foreign in terms of geography, also foreign in terms of biological also. So you also worship Padmanabha Swami, and that how he is making sure striking a balance between these Western medicine aspect while on the aspect of religion, Hindu practices itself. So it might not be very relevant about Bengal in this context, but we definitely kind of see that ritualistic aspect also in the state of Travancore in the 18th and the 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, this kind of study must be there, and I'm not aware of, the other parts of India, because obviously, it's a vast area, it's a vast field. I mean, people have to take up such studies for different parts of India also. But then we have scope for these studies. Now people have started doing researches in different diseases of the past. So this disease of the present time, like the coronavirus, would become an interesting case study for the future historians of 22nd century, isn't it?
Sir?
Yes,
Yes.
Mona Lisa.
Thank you for sharing your views. So my question is, as part of the volcanic eruption that lasted for roughly 3 years, and the consequences in Bay of Bengal led to cholera. So in the island you talked about, is there any kind of pathological impact or which changes the human physically? Let's say case of Japan, when the attack happened and the population was exposed to radioactive material. So for generations and generations, there were certain physical deformities which continued for a long time. So particularly in the case of Ireland, you have talked about the 3 long years gap that lasted, the ashes of a volcanic eruption lasted. So do we have any kind of evidences that impacted the human that, be it in case of pathology, or there is a physical deformity or some changes in physique of human, the inhabitants particularly, as opposite to Bay of Bengal, which led to cholera? Thank you. And plus, I just want to ask, there's a clarification. These statues which you have shown us, I think, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there is some historians say that they compare it with this some Asian goddess, maybe Shiva or some Asian or no. Okay.
No connection at all.
Thank you.
Yeah. So coming back to your first question, so far as the deformities are concerned, I mean, these volcanic eruption and the ashes that come out, till now there is no connection as such. I mean, the people who are living close to the volcanic area, they would obviously die because of the volcano and the eruption that has taken place. But in far off lands, there is absolutely no connection till now, which has been suggested by modern studies even, which say that there is a deformities taking place because of the volcano and volcanic eruption. Obviously, there must be some kind of a disorder like the breeding troubles, right? In the case of area closer to Indonesia, you have evidences of such kind, which I mean, I've not exactly read those Southeast Asian accounts, but there must be these accounts from Southeast Asia which talk about the kind of experiences that the people had about the volcanic eruption. Because as I said, in far off lands like in India, or for that matter in Atlantic or in Europe, when the volcano happened, nobody knew about the volcanic eruption unless until people, the geographical explorers or the people who were moving in the sea, they realized that there is a volcano which has erupted in some part of East Indies, Indonesia, and then the information came to different parts of Europe, or for that matter India. But then people really observe, like as I mentioned, that you will find in many of the paintings of 1816 and 17, which says that when they paint something, they are paintings and they are giving a picture which is dark in background. There is a cloud all around. Even many of the novels which were written at that time, they talk about some kind of a this ashes all around in the sky. So I mean, this kind of a There is in fact one very interesting novel which was written at that time called The Last Man, right? So stories of this kind are there, and which bring the weather of that time into their description. In fact, about cholera, there is a very popular folklore, folk story rather, of that time, about a man who goes to a village. He goes to that village and he has been offered dinner by the owner of a particular house, and then he asks the person who is to bring in the light. So there is a candle which comes in, and then he wants that person to know exactly who has cooked the food for him. And then he realizes that there is no one around. So there is a ghost story which is associated with cholera epidemic, that there is nobody in the village all around, and he gets a food, and all people have died of cholera. So this kind of a story is associated with many of the diseases. That means the cholera disease is so disastrous for the people that if it comes, the entire village would be eliminated. So yeah, I think we don't have study of that kind related to Southeast Asia. There may be some in the local literatures, in local Southeast Asian studies. We can find those studies in Southeast Asia, but not exactly anything related to these studies in India, or for that matter in Europe, that we get evidence of. No evidence of deformities as such.
So yeah, Bipul sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are audible.
Any more question?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let's take the last one because it's already 1:30.
yes. This is Kennedy, sir. Yeah, I had a question. Like, in terms of, like, you were discussing how certain environmental events could also determine human actions. So, in case of Mizoram, it's a fairly popular issue where the bamboo flowering in Mizoram always brings about some sort of political movement or a revolt in Mizoram. It's called Motam. Bamboo flowering, where the rats rapidly multiply and destroy all the food supplies. So when there was insurgency in the Mizo Hills back in Mrs. Indira Gandhi's time, it was also preceded by this bamboo flowering incident. So have you come across any such events similar to such thing?
I don't know, but there is one person I know that who has done this kind of a study, who has done a study of he was actually a professor in Mizoram University. And he used to tell me, he wrote in fact a book, but I did not get a chance to read his book, about a flower which used to come after every few years. I mean, after many years, like 25 or 30 years. It was after 25 or 30 years that the flower would come, and then there'll be some kind of a calamity which would come along with the flower. I mean, this kind of a study is obviously there in northeastern part of India. In other parts of India, you will find few of the studies like this. I mean, we have many evidences from Rajasthan, like the folk literatures of Rajasthan, which tell us about the connection of birds. If the birds are like they are taking bath in sand, that means there going to be some problem of weather, or there may be no rain coming in. So, I mean, this kind of a folk literature is there, and all these folk literature or folk stories or folklores are actually based on experiences of the people. So, I mean, there are many works of such kind. In the case of Rajasthan, I have come across one very interesting work. There is one guy who has, in fact, collected various Bhojpuri folk songs, which talk about these various natural phenomena happening, and then its association and connection with various natural calamities. So, I mean, obviously, this can be an interesting work for many historians. But then historians, what they do is that when they use these folk literatures of folklores or the folk stories associated with connection of flowers, or for that matter with birds or animals, or the sounds of the animals which are connected to some kind of a calamity coming up. I mean, these have to be then corroborated with certain other evidences available to us. But that certainly that could be a very interesting study.
Okay, thank you.
Now that we have arrived at the end of the session, I would now like to request our Professor Pallavi Prasad ma'am to come forth and deliver the formal vote of thanks and officially end the session. The audience are requested to keep their camera on for the pictures. Ma'am, the stage is all yours.
Yeah, so with this, we come to an end of another lecture, a very interesting lecture of the Itihas Manthan series of Shashwat Society, the History Society. It was a real pleasure listening to you, Professor Vipul Singh. And I would like to thank you on behalf of the Shashwat Society, our history department, for coming and, sparing your time and giving us this enlightening lecture. And the way you have kind of explored the connections between natural calamities and their implications and the human responsibility therein it is interesting, and it kind of tells it is something that it can serve as a warning for us that if we keep interfering in the natural ways of things that they are, then we are in for many more such calamities. This brings me, the way you were talking about different connections repeatedly, the collapse of the Harappan civilization and the climate change theory therein, and the decline of the Crete, the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, and the decline of the Minoan civilization, those kind of connections which I teach, those kept coming in my mind. So, and I would say that you also very well brought out the interdisciplinary nature of, or the interdisciplinary methodology that has been used for study of environmental history. So that is something that, our students would really would learn for their further researches. So thank you, sir, for taking out your time and giving us this enlightening lecture. I would also like to thank the entire department and Professor Povanja for making it possible for us to hear a lecture like this, and the entire Shashwat team, especially Meghna and Jay and Dhiren Deshmukh for making this kind of a lecture a success. And I hope that in future again we would have this opportunity to listen to you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Hope you have a wonderful day. This is Meghna Manoj signing off.
बहुत धन्यवाद विपुल जी, बहुत धन्यवाद पल्लवी, बहुत बढ़िया रहा, बहुत अच्छा रहा, and our students are really happy about it. And we will upload this video on the YouTube channel of the college and can be shared with anybody. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.